Hey, Matt. How's it going?
Well, hello there, David, and hello to our audience. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good.
I think, the topic kind of speaks for itself, right? The storm rages on. So I wonder, David, if that means we're going to talk about storm again.
Nah.
We'll go through our normal segments today. One of them will be, is there any good news? And I'll tell you all about that in a second. We'll jump on the highway to the danger zone, probably talk about storm just to warn you. Then we'll talk about some vulnerabilities. And we always say time at the end for Q&A. So please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A. We'd love interacting with you, our audience. You guys are what makes the show possible. So we really appreciate it. So let's crack straight into it. In our first segment, we always like to cover some good news in cybersecurity. There is often a lot of doom and gloom, just this rainy picture, this very stormy picture of how the world of cybersecurity is. But we do have some good news to share. First and foremost, I think the Justice Department, safe to say, is catching up with the crypto times and making sure that age-old saying, if you do the crime, you're going to do the time, applies to cryptocurrency-related crimes as well. NCET, or the National Cryptocurrency Enforcement Team, will become a permanent part of the criminal justice and investigative arm of the Department of Justice. Acting director, and if anybody knows how to pronounce this and I get it wrong, let me know, Claudia Quiroz
Pretty good.
takes over for recently transferred to another role, Young Choi. And a notable takedowns, if you probably haven't heard of NCET yet, include the charges against the founder of Bislotto and the investigations into the activities occurring at Binance. I, for one, am rooting for NCET, though I kind of like saying the full National Cryptocurrency Enforcement Team because it sounds kind of fancy. Although, I wonder if it's just another department inside the Department of Justice that's going to have their own SWAT team, but I guess time will tell and we'll find out.
Yeah. And if you recognize this reference to the TV show that was from the late 1800s, please chat it in there. That's my job, to put in references that no one will understand.
Yeah, David, I do think sometimes your
You go.
people are out there and they do get it. Look, we got two, Megan and John, both
Hey.
recognize this from Dragon. I did not, by the
All
way.
right.
So as our producers were kind of going through the run of show for today, I said, what's this? Is it James Bond? Is it a Bond that I don't recognize? But it looks like a
Yeah.
couple of people do get the reference there.
But I get to say just the facts, Matt. So
Is that something from the show?
yeah.
Okay. I got it. Just the facts. Well, give us just the facts here in the danger zone, David. What's going on in the banking sector?
What is going on in the banking sector? So this is, I think, one of the first open source supply chain attacks. At least that's what they're saying. There was some malicious code the attackers went to some pretty good lengths to actually get this code injected and downloaded into the bank. They basically wrote some software for some banking software, or for the banking application, and uploaded it to NPM. And then they created a LinkedIn profile that made it look like they were an employee at the bank. And then the bank actually downloaded the malware, right? So they basically thought this malware was their code and downloaded it, if I'm understanding it correctly. And then the code was actually pretty clever too. The first code was basically said, okay, what kind of host am I running on? What domain am I running on? And then went out through Azure CDN, which bypassed some of the, basically it went on the allow list, and downloaded the second stage payload, which contained Havoc. That of course is a remote shell, right? And then started to do its damage right through that C2 package there, if I had that right. So really it's a supply chain attack, but it's piggybacking on some open source software that the bank thought was written by somebody that was not a hacker. So this is something to watch out for. A lot of people use open source software and adaptations of it for a lot of things.
So I wonder if the lesson here is that even these pseudo trusted sources of code or information, you still got to trust the person that's coming from. You got to still make sure they're an authorized person, because this kind of fraudulent employee, there's a layer of sophistication here that we haven't seen in other supply chain attacks, or at least where the details haven't come out yet.
Yeah, I think it talks to, signing code, and we're going to talk a little bit about signatures, right? Coming up with Storm as well.
It also makes me wonder. I wonder how many people in our audience, and just curious, guys, want to use like a chat in if this applies to you, have actually identified a fraudulent LinkedIn profile getting connections at your company. Because I've definitely done that.
Yeah.
I've seen those fraudulent LinkedIn profiles come across, and I'm like, who is this person? And I go and I look them up in Outlook, and they don't exist. And I usually report that to the SOC team, but I wonder if people are aware of that as like a social engineering method, or maybe we need to do a better job in industry at making awareness to not just accepting people that look like they work for your company, but maybe doing like a little bit of due diligence. Like, do they actually work there?
Yeah, and I'm not even sure that they would have needed to make a ton of connections, but it certainly would have helped if they had a couple of connections too, right?
Take it a step further, right? And we'll talk about more like Microsoft and their responsibilities later, especially when we talk about like Storm. It should LinkedIn actually be like, to say you work at a company, should you have to like click on a link from your corporate email address to prove you work there to be able to actually even get a page that says you work there? I'm pro that. That's a feature request if we've got any LinkedIn folks out there.
Yeah, I mean, if we're using it to authenticate, an identity, it does make sense. There should be a couple of hoops to go through.
Yeah, and Charles, I agree with you there. Perhaps like identity management is important. Yeah, totally. I think we can't not talk about MOVEit, right? I know the Storm is the big news here, but I think at least publicly known over 400 victims. And it's estimated by Coveware, they're a company that specializes in ransomware recovery, that Clop's going to earn around $100 million from this supply chain attack. Now, I think it's also interesting that they're reporting that only about 1 in 3 companies are actually paying for the ransom, but that means this is still big business, right? If they're getting a 1 in 3 success rate and still having the opportunity to make $100 million, I think that this is just a sign we're going to see more and more supply chain attacks that are either found by someone and sold to ransomware gangs, which is a little bit of a theory that I have here, or the ransomware gangs are hiring security researchers and finding these things themselves, because the efficacy level, the effectiveness of these types of attacks is super clear. And I think, just to talk again about like social engineering and the sophistication of it, Clop is even getting into a little bit of like the branding and the kind of advertising media company like approach that we saw with things like DarkSide and the Black Manta ransomware groups, where they're advertising these fake, kind of like these sites that are clearly fraudulent, where they're advertising the data that was stolen from their clients. And so I think, there is a little bit of good news. There's just like this beacon of light that shines from this, though, and that is that MOVEit had way more customers than 400. So a good number of organizations did rapidly either take the appliances down, apply mitigations, or fix their systems, or put detective or compensating controls in place. So there is like a little bit of good news here, but all these other companies losing $400 million or $100 million, it's pretty damning.
Yeah, definitely. It looks like the ransom amount for people that do pay is actually getting higher, right? So they're potentially going up market in terms of their victims.
I think it's also clear, this stuff's not just on the dark web anymore, right? A Bleeping Computer reported that data on the leaks are now actually available on the open internet. And I think that's like a definitely also a shift, right? Because you're not just saying like hackers come look at this, like you got to have an onion browser. You're saying anyone on the internet come peruse through this data. We also saw this tactic used by the Alpha V ransomware group. Now, I'm not sure if that means that there's a connection there, or they're just kind of taking the best of and kind of reusing what works. But this is that tactic that David and I often talk about, that double and triple extortion. Instead of just saying like, we're not going to give you the decryptor, or we're going to unleash the ransomware and decryptor files, they're also threatening like, we're going to put it in the public domain if you don't pay us, just to add to another layer of what kind of is that classic ransomware attack has also become a bit of an extortionware or a extortion type attack as well.
Yeah, I think, this is, if it's searchable, there's kind of a shaming effect. And if the people that have been victimized have clients whose data is in the package that was exfiltrated, I think they might be getting external pressure to pay for that as well. So that might be part of a component there that they're trying to add some pressure there.
Now, David, I know that you are like super pumped up to talk about like whatever has happened to Storm about Storm. Now, there's some, and I want you to explain it to our audience, but I think the core thing here is on one side of the fence, we've got Microsoft saying, we understand what happened, and it's this. On the other side of the fence, we've got security researchers from Wiz saying something different. Can you kind of walk this through for our audience?
Yeah, Microsoft talked about the breach of email, and we talked about this last time. And since we spoke last time, Wiz came out and said, hey, this breach looks like it was bigger, that it was more than just email that was potentially compromised. And, I actually was curious about this because if you log into Outlook Web Access, you can see SharePoint Online, you can see OneDrive, and it's sort of like, wait a minute, you can't use the same token to access all that stuff. It looks like it's more than just email, but that isn't quite true. Go ahead.
Yeah, yes, I know that we looked into that with our research team, but it also brings the question for me. Are you using that token? Are you getting another token? That's what's unclear to me. Are you only using this one forged token? Or once you use that forged token to sign in, are you getting a token from Microsoft, legitimate, or illegitimately crafted, but legitimate, but separate from this forged token that is your single sign-on token? I think this is the part that's really unclear to me. That maybe this is what the angle that Wiz is taking is you see Microsoft come out and say, like, these are hypothetical attack scenarios, but not things that we've observed exploited right now.
Yeah.
But they're also not saying, they're also not things that we've confirmed haven't happened, right? Like they're not saying that we've like combed through everything. We know this didn't happen. They're just saying we haven't seen that this actually did happen, but it could be possible.
Yeah, that statement never gives me confidence as we haven't observed this. It's sort of like, hey, the absence of evidence is just not the evidence of absence. It's not the same thing. And when people say we haven't seen that before, it reminds me of the black swan. People believe it doesn't exist. The good news is, at least in their public statements, is they did when they started investigating the breach, assume that the actor was able to get further. And then over the course of their investigation, they said, okay, no, it looks like it's just Exchange Online. But it doesn't, when people don't conclusively say it would not be possible to use these tokens to access other things, then it does kind of leave room for doubt.
Yeah, and is this like one of these things we're going to talk about 10 more times? Like, are we just like the tip of the iceberg outside of the water? And the other thing that this brings up for me is like the shared responsibility model. Because on one hand, right, I think it is an obligation company like ours. We publish research all the time. Company like Wiz, make research, make these claims, right? It's our job to challenge the status quo of, is the security we're getting from these like giants, is it good enough? Is he even good? On the other hand, though, like we put a lot of trust into Microsoft. They haven't really led us astray. I mean, obviously they create the vulnerabilities, they create the products, but then they also the vulnerabilities are inherent in them, but then they usually patch them and fix them. Like I have some empathy for them too, but it's like, it's in their best interest to say, oh, no, we don't know. And it's in Wiz's best interest to say, yeah, but maybe. And so kind of where is truth? This is what's got leaving me perplexed.
Yeah, well, I think this clearly would not be in the realm of any customer's responsibility to really manage the key signing process there. I don't think correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's any way that anybody could have mitigated this on their own. And in terms of the detective aspects, yes, if you had the logging, and it was robust enough, maybe you could be able to see some of this unusual activity. But a lot of people didn't even have access to the logging there. But
and Marcel makes a good point, right? Give us the logs. I mean, finally, they're coming out and saying they're going to give everybody the logs that the E5 customers could have leveraged here.
It just who's watching the watchmen, really? If there is a failure from your provider, and you can't really even detect unusual access or detect the failure on your own, it is kind of a tough thing to swallow from a shared
And
responsibility model.
Charles from our chat, I just wanted to share this, David. This, he believes this is the tip of the iceberg, and that token and API security will kind of dominate headlines in the near future because it's still Wild West. You know, a lot of traffic over the internet is token-based authentication, and it's not a place that a lot of people have explored to secure. And I'll say maybe not even done enough research in. I think that's the lesson learned here, is that security researchers need to, you know, shift a little bit of that mind share towards you know, token and token security and forging and fraudulent tokens and using fraudulent tokens and the things that we can do to get our arms around that.
Yeah, and right now it looks like the only thing we can do to see if there was any evidence of being affected by this breach is look at some of the network traffic for, you know, soft ether proxy. You know, and
I thought you were going to say ask Chat GPT, and I'm glad you didn't.
No, but you know, the TTPs from Microsoft on their blog gave a list of, you know, IP addresses to look out for, and so that, you know, looks like if you're wondering whether you've been attacked, I don't really see a whole lot more that you can go do at this point. Did you read anything else in there that you might?
No, I like the comment from Philip that the banking regulators are getting excited about API security. Because I think that's where a lot of these things start, right? You get pressure from these large institutions on, hey, our vendors, they got to do better with this. It starts to trickle down. I mean, hey, if the banks are doing that, Philip, if you got some insider information there, thank you. Like, we need more pressure on this. And David, I got to call you out on this one, okay? Because I'm wondering if you're like masquerading as a cyber criminal here. You know, on our last episode, you said something about the dangers of ChatGPT and said it's only a matter of time before we've got ChatGPT tools writing phishing emails. And a week later, what are we doing here on the show but talking about a new AI tool called Fraud GPT that uses AI to craft phishing emails and social engineering emails? So I got to say, are you giving people ideas, or, you know, is there some kind, do you have like a call sign that we don't know about on the show yet?
I don't know.
Like
well,
the Gibsonator or something like this.
Last time we talked about Worm GPT, and maybe you know, as another, you know, AI used for malware criminals. Maybe they use Worm GPT to write, you know, Fraud GPT. I don't know.
Or maybe, here you go. I'm going to type it in the chat, see what our audience thinks of my new hacker name for you. Is it D4DH4X? Is it dad hacks? You know, like dad jokes. Like, I'm wondering if this is going to be your new call sign. All right, so there's one. You know, we just cracked the can on the JumpCloud breach last time. What have we learned about that since then?
This one, the JumpCloud. I'm so distracted by the dad.
This is the. I know. I'm sorry. I got the chat going on you, and I distracted you. This was the one. This was the cloud authentication broker doing a lot of brokerage for a lot of other cloud companies. Had an intrusion. Looks like all the big names are getting in on it. And there's this theory that it's Lazarus Group that's behind it.
Yeah. So the North Korean DPRK group has been looks like the attacks are from them. All the TTPs match. So some attribution now going to that same group. Which, as we've seen over the years, does a lot of crypto heists and things like that. So
yeah, I was going to say, what's the crypto angle here? Is there maybe JumpCloud had to be doing something for a crypto, right? And this is just like the start of the supply chain attack, because it's all crypto they've been going after lately.
I know it's it sort of seems like the same playbook, right? Get some way in, whether it's MOVEit or whether it's JumpCloud, and then exploit, run the same playbook, get to data. And then threaten to leak it, right, or make it unavailable. So this could be a new case for the National Cryptocurrency Enforcement Team. Or
yeah, I'm sure if they had a hit TV series or a hit web series like State of Cybercrime, I'm sure they would say we're on the case. Or what is there another quote you could do from that show at the beginning that they would have said?
You know, I'm sticking with just the facts, Matt.
And I think that pretty much wraps it up for us, David. You know, we kind of took all the questions as they came in the chat. We love being here and getting to talk with you about all things cybercrime. And so I just really appreciate you being here with us today.
Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks all.